process to give the states and tribes the ability to address California's sea lion predation of salmon and other species on a limited basis. It seems incomprehensible that Pacific Northwest ratepayers annually continue to invest hundreds of millions of dollars into recovering salmon while allowing many of them to be on the dinner plates of sea lions. This bill helps change that dynamic. I want to thank the bill sponsor for being with us today, and I look forward to her testimony on the bill. Today's agenda also includes a discussion draft of my bill, the Reclamation Title Transfer Act. This bill aims to streamline the process for the transfer of some of the Bureau of Reclamation's projects to local beneficiaries who in many cases have or will repay the federal investment and already operate and maintain these projects. Transferring these low-hanging fruit projects or parts of them will allow water districts to leverage non-federal financing through ownership equity and will decrease federal liability. This is not a new idea. In fact, former Vice President Al Gore's Reinventing Government initiative proposed this concept in the mid-1990s. Following that, Congress has passed a number of title transfers over the last 2 decades, but at an alarmingly slow pace. This administration recently indicated that it will examine ways to facilitate more transfers. This draft legislation does just that, as recognized by today's administration testimony. While we will hear today that Congress has enacted some title transfers, we will also hear that the current process is time-consuming, cumbersome, expensive, and uncertain. This has proven to be a disincentive to many water users who are now rightly asking for and deserving change. However, it wouldn't be fair to heap all of the blame on the agency. Congress has done its fair share, slowing some of these simple title transfers. Under current practice, every single transfer, regardless of the size or scope, needs congressional authorization. I want to be clear to my colleagues that this legislation does not remove congressional oversight. In fact, my draft includes language that requires a 30-day notification to Congress, similar to the Federal Safety of Dams statute. At the end of the day, my draft provides, and I want to stress, an optional process that can be used to expedite simple title transfers. Any title transfer can still use the existing process if the participants prefer. I look forward to working with stakeholders and the administration moving forward to ensure that my legislation meets its intended goals while ensuring no unintended harm, no unintended consequences that be done to water or power users. A title transfer historically has been a win-win for the local water users and the federal government. Given that bipartisan administrations have pursued these efforts, this bill improves this process without undermining environmental laws. So I want to thank the witnesses for traveling here to be with us today. Your input is extremely valuable as we work through the legislative process, and I look forward to hearing your testimony. I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Huffman of California, for 5 minutes for his statement.
Well, thank you and good morning, Mr. Chairman. Welcome to our visitors and our witness. I really appreciate the dedication of those who have chosen to be with us here at a time when the rest of the world is kind of focusing on the other side of the Capitol. But I'm looking forward to our conversation. We have first up draft legislation, as you mentioned, Mr. Chair, to change the Bureau of Reclamation's title transfer process. This draft would allow the Secretary to transfer federally owned reclamation project and facility ownership to non-federal entities, such as local water districts, without congressional approval. And that is a point on which I hope we can have some more conversation. Because under current law, that transfer would require congressional oversight and approval, and I believe that's an important safeguard. Mr. Chairman, I certainly welcome a conversation about reforming the title transfer process. In fact, you may recall that in the last Congress I introduced legislation that would have made it quicker and easier to carry out non-controversial title transfers. However, in my proposal, I took pains to make sure that I didn't undermine existing safeguards that ensure public input and fair taxpayer compensation. And for example, my proposal kept in place Congress's ability to disapprove of the title transfer should the executive branch attempt to dispose of property in a situation where Congress felt there was a compelling public benefit from federal ownership. Another example, I believe we need to ensure that these transfers don't undermine bedrock environmental laws like the ESA or NEPA. These conveyances can't undermine our obligation to protect our environmental, cultural, and historic resources. As we consider potential reforms, I think we can certainly make it easier to carry out title transfers for non-controversial single-purpose projects that only serve a narrow set of stakeholders. That being said, I would not support a bill that authorizes one group of stakeholders to take sole ownership of large, multi-purpose water projects that serve numerous stakeholders. Multi-purpose projects, of which there are many across the West, often need to be operated in a manner that balances sometimes conflicting stakeholder interests, and so transferring ownership to just one set of stakeholders or one stakeholder would likely result in significant harm to many other interests impacted by the operation of the projects, including tribes, fishing groups, power users, and environmental and recreational interests, to name a few. So in short, Mr. Chair, I hope we can keep working together on this issue. I think there's room to improve the existing process while keeping important protections in place. Next, we have H.R. 2083, which addresses a topic very familiar to this committee, predation of salmon and steelhead on the Columbia River by sea lions. In the past, I've expressed a willingness to work with Ms. Herrera-Butler and others on compromise legislation that would provide states and tribes some additional flexibility with regard to removing sea lions from certain choke points on the Columbia. This offer still stands. Unfortunately, we are back with legislation that is in need of improvement, and instead of accepting an offer to find common ground, I'm afraid this year's version of the bill proposes killing 10 times as many sea lions without any evidence that such an extreme approach would do anything to help salmon populations. Unfortunately, large numbers of sea lions are not the greatest cause of poor salmon runs. The federal Columbia River power system is. Estimates show that this project, the dams in this project, kill up to 25% of the adult salmon and steelhead going up the river and 30 to 80% of the juveniles coming back down. As a result, many salmon runs have become endangered and our salmon fisheries have suffered. I'd like to highlight that I am not calling for removal of all dams on the Columbia River. With respect to the major hydro projects on the main stem of the Columbia River, federal agencies and regional stakeholders have invested billions in mitigating damage to salmon and steelhead runs there. And while there's still work to be done, there's also been significant progress. But if we want to talk about recovering salmon runs in the Columbia Basin, there is an elephant in the room. 4 elephants to be precise, 4 aging and increasingly obsolete dams on the lower Snake River, Ice Harbor, Lower Monumental, Little Goose, and Lower Granite dams. They've caused salmon returns to the Snake to plummet by 90%, devastating commercial, recreational, and tribal fishing interests and threatening many salmon runs with extinction. And despite dubious reports issued by the Army Corps of Engineers, these dams do not provide a significant amount of the region's hydropower, and in fact, they are of dubious economic value, certainly relative to the extreme economic harm and environmental harm that they cause. So I hope we'll have an opportunity to talk about this broader and frankly more effective approach at bringing back our salmon runs, but I look forward to our conversation with Ms. Herrera-Butler about her bill today.
Okay, thank you. We will now move to our first witness panel to hear testimony from our colleague from Washington State, Mrs. Herrera-Butler. As a reminder, you are limited to 5 minutes, but your written statement will appear in full in the hearing record. You are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Lambourne and Ranking Member Huffman, for having me today, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to advocate on behalf of H.R. 2083, the Endangered Salmon and Fisheries Predation and Prevention Act. It's a mouthful. I'm also very pleased that Leland Bill is here with us today. Mr. Bill is the chairman of the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission and a member of the Yakama Nation Tribal Council, and I appreciate that he was willing to make this trip across the country here to testify. And we both agree that it's of important recreational, economic, and cultural value to ensure the recovery of our salmon, a unique and important resource to those of us in the Pacific Northwest, and I'm honored to have him here today. The Endangered Salmon and Fisheries Predation Prevention Act provides tribal members and government resource managers with the means to rapidly respond and remove California sea lions from specific areas where they're posing the most harm to our salmon restoration efforts. Despite existing law, we continue to have big problems with sea lion predation on the Columbia River. Mr. Chairman, the Columbia River makes up the entire southern border of my district. It's the third largest inland waterway in the nation. The river is a lifeline for clean, affordable energy, which would require about 16 coal-fired plants in terms of base load, which is one of the reasons we want to protect it. And it brings an important economic benefit both to recreational and commercial fishing. The Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife estimates that there are more than 3,500 sea lions residing in the lower end of the river. This figure is more than double 2014's record of 1,420 sea lions. State studies show that between 16 and 20% of the spring salmon run may be consumed by sea lions. This is unacceptable. While the lethal take of sea lions is a last resort, it is necessary to protect hundreds of millions of dollars of investment in the Northwest residents have made to protect and restore and enhance salmon and other ESA species on the river. Here's a couple of pictures I'm going to send around of some of our offenders. And the sea lions, if it's possible to have this sent around to the committee. The sea lions are not just a threat to salmon, but also to recreational access on the Columbia River, which is of great importance to my district. Sea lions are reportedly having a devastating impact on the harbors and docks at the mouth of the Columbia, specifically with the East Marina in Astoria. Enactment of this bill would be a start, returning the number of sea lion to a level that would minimize their damage to docks and harbors and increase access for fishermen and recreationalists. This is my next show and tell, and I'm going to have this sent around too as well. From the economic side of things alone, recreational fishing helps support more than 5,100 jobs and over $247 million in income for Washington residents. And this is not new legislation, but it's also not a new problem. The sea lion issue persists and is actually getting worse. After listening to resource managers, I've made changes to the bill to ensure that the growing problems are properly addressed. My district continues to have concerns about the huge sea lion population's negative impact from restricting access on our river and its tributaries to damaging salmon recovery. Something that is especially concerning since my constituents, many of whom rely on clean, sustainable hydropower generated from the Columbia, are funding salmon restoration policies through their utility rates. There are impacts from the dams on salmon runs. And we as people have decided we're going to spend upwards of $1 billion to mitigate and do the best we can to make changes there and offset the impact. The sea lion are making no such improvements or enhancements or offers to offset their damage. Hydro customers pay for regional fish and wildlife program through their wholesale power purchases from Bonneville Power Administration, which reports that as much of 1/3 of customers' utility bill is going to fish and wildlife commitments. Now, I want to ensure that those funds are being put to good use and that we're implementing policies based on sound science that are not undermining our ability to deal with this predation problem. This bill is a much-needed solution. The bill would amend Section 120 of the Marine Mammal Protection Act to authorize Secretary of Commerce to issue permits to eligible entities permitting the lethal take of sea lions on the waters of the Columbia River and its tributaries as long as the sea lions are not listed as depleted under MMPA or threatened under ESA. I also want to make sure that people understand this bill enjoys bipartisan support, both here in Congress and at home. The Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, the Coastal Conservation Association of Oregon and Washington, the Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Oregon State Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Northwest Power and Conservation Council, and Public Utilities are among its supporters. This is an incredibly important bill, and I think it allows us to maintain access to our river, keep our commitment to tribal obligations, and ensure a quality return on our government and taxpayers' investment on salmon recovery. With that, I thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. Is that working?
Oh, that one's.
Thank you for your testimony. We have a new sound system here we're still figuring out.
Wonderful.
But I think this is a great bill, and I look forward to the markup on it later on. I know you have another committee to go to, so you're excused, but thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We will now call up the second panel of witnesses, some of whom will testify on that bill and some who will be testifying on the discussion draft. Let's see, where's the list? Oh, here we go. Okay, we have the Honorable Leland Bill, Chairman of the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission from Portland, Oregon. Mr. James Hess, Chief of Staff, Bureau of Reclamation. Mr. Tom Knutson, Board of Directors of the National Water Resources Association of St. Paul, Nebraska, Mr. Gary Dorr, Minority Witness, Nimipu, Protecting the Environment, Lapwai, Idaho, and Mr. Dan Keppen, Executive Director of the Family Farm Alliance, Klamath Falls, Oregon. Now, as you come forward, let me point out that each witness's written testimony will appear in full in the hearing record, so I ask that the witnesses keep their oral statements to 5 minutes, as outlined in our invitation letter to you and under Committee Rule 4A. I also want to explain how our timing lights work. When you are recognized, press the talk button to activate your microphone. Once you begin your testimony, the clerk will start the timer and a green light will appear. After 4 minutes, a yellow light will appear, and at that time you should begin to conclude your statement. At 5 minutes, the red light will come on, and I will ask that you complete your statement at that point. Our first witness is the Honorable Leland Bill, Chairman of the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, based out of Portland, Oregon. Chairman Bill, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Nechmaitsky. In Inknash Wanikshas, Leland Bill, Ku Wapshuch is my Indian name. Chairman Lamborn, Ranking Member Huffman, and committee members, thank you for this opportunity to testify today. My name is Leland Bill. I am a member of the Yakama Nation and serve as chairman of the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, our acronym CRITFIC. In addition to the Yakama Nation, the other 3 members of the CRITFIC are Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs Reservation, Nez Perce Tribe, and the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Reservation. I'm accompanied by Charles Hudson of our commission staff. I'm aware of the subcommittee received a letter yesterday from Nez Perce Chairman Mary Jane Miles expressing support for my testimony. CRIFIC has the best fishery workforce in the world, but what makes us strongest in our unity. So I am very much appreciative of Chairman Miles' letter. The sea lion and salmon conflict in the Columbia River is characterized by high frustration and high emotion. CRIFIC strongly supports H.R. 2083, the Endangered Salmon and Fisheries Predation Prevention Act, not only for the tools it delivers, but as a signal from Congress that you have taken responsibility for reconciling a conflict between the Marine Mammal Protection Act and the Endangered Species Act. The CRIFIC tribes wish to thank Congresswoman Herrera Butler for leading H.R. 2083. The bill is bipartisan and is backed by a large and growing state, tribal, and public support in Pacific Northwest. H.R. 2083 needs enactment for the following reasons. It is informed by 17 years of tribal, state, and federal recommendations derived from observation and data gathering on sea lion abundance and predation statistics. By H.R. 2083 is guided by 10 years of real on the river experience implementing section 120 permit removal. It is responsive to the conclusion of the recent convened PINPED interaction task force, who state currently levels of permit activity are inadequate to solve the problem. H.R. 2083 is responsive to the news flashpoint of conflict like Cowlitz River, the Willamette River, and Clackamas River. H.R. 2083 provides management access to our tribes and CRIFIC, a shortcoming of current law. H.R. 2083 recognizes the damaging being done to tribal ceremonial, subsistence, and commercial fisheries from growing sea lion predation. Sea lions are damaging salmon runs, particularly the spring Chinook salmon, so important to our people. I have the same pictures here to display on the sea lions. Not survived to spawning grounds to replenish the stock. There are hundreds of fish that have come over Bonneville Dam in this condition. Mr. Chairman, my written testimony contains the other photos showing the alarming abundance of sea lions. They are fully recovered, overabundant in our areas, and in complete contrast to the 13 stocks of endangered salmon, steelhead, and Columbia Basin. Mr. Chairman, let me describe for you the cumbersome process we face today to remove a problem sea lion under current law. There are 7 steps, including trapping, branding, and release, followed by observation, hazing, data review, placement, and removal list, retrapping if possible, and finally removal. As you can see, this process is filled with arbitrary requirements and uncertainty, all at the cost to endangered fish. While the law requires to focus on animal, hundreds of untrapped, unmarked sea lions are swimming alongside it, are eating many fish. H.R. 2083 will streamline the process, making it more biologically sound and safer for management professionals. Our tribes are witnessing an extraordinary public outcry for help with this problem. There is a growing coalition calling for a solution. Citizens are motivated by memory in the 1990s at Seattle Ballard Locks. Lack of management tools, prolonged litigation, and by interest groups allowed problem sea lions to bring about functional extinction of Lake Washington run of winter steelhead. Even today, that run of steelhead deemed no longer viable. That cannot be repeated in Columbia River. We are seeing hundreds of millions of dollars each year recovering efforts decimated by sea lions. Fishing seasons are limited, water is spilled over dams, electric ratepayers help rebuild runs, and many are asked to sacrifice. To date, the tribe's management role has been the hazing and monitoring. We've always cautioned that it's dangerous work and requirements to haze must consider human safety. Loss of Greg George. Passage of this litigation shows that Congress will address the contradictions in our well-intended natural resources law. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
All right, thank you for your testimony and for being here. Our second witness is Mr. James Hess, Chief of Staff of the Bureau of Reclamation here in D.C. Mr. Hess, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Huffman, and members of the subcommittee. I'm James Hess. I'm Chief of Staff at the Bureau of Reclamation. In addition to my duties as Chief of Staff, I serve as Reclamation's Title Transfer Coordinator, so I am very familiar with the issues and challenges that we face in this area. So thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the Reclamation Title Transfer Act. As my full written testimony has been submitted for the record, I'll briefly summarize the Department's views on the bill. The Department strongly supports the goals of the discussion draft and the committee's work to better facilitate title transfer of reclamation facilities to non-federal entities. Our support for this concept is grounded in our aim to enable local water managers to make their own decisions at the local level while allowing reclamation to focus its management efforts on projects with a greater federal nexus. The discussion draft addresses the reclamation law requirement title to reclamation projects, lands, and facilities remain with the United States until such time as the title transfer is expressly authorized by Congress. For many years, reclamation and interested non-federal entities have worked together to negotiate the terms and conditions of specific title transfers, and what we've learned is that even for the simple transfers, there are unique complexities associated with each that we have to work through, which has meant that this can be potentially a time-consuming and costly process. Despite that, since 1996, Reclamation has transferred title to 30 projects or parts of projects, and these title transfers have generally provided mutual benefits to both Reclamation and the entities involved. In an effort to work with non-federal entities who are interested in pursuing title transfer, Reclamation developed a process, the framework, to facilitate title transfer in a consistent and comprehensive manner. This process has allowed interested non-federal entities to work with Reclamation and, along with other stakeholders,